Alrighty, guys, welcome to the podcast. This is Amendment 13, the Abolishment of Slavery podcast. This is a project for Miss Villieu or Miss Haynes for South Neck. Basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing what Amendment 13 means and what it means in context of the government at this time. Now we have Jennifer and Danielson over here as well.
Hello.
Hi.
And so let's just pick this off. So the first question is, what is slavery and what does it mean?
Slavery is basically when humans are seen as property towards another person against their will and they aren't paid for their labor.
Absolutely.
And they're used to do whatever. They're basically not treated as humans, and they have no rights to do anything, and they can't do anything.
Right, and in Amendment 13 it states that, and this is the direct quote from the amendment, it says, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." So Amendment 13 effectively abolished slavery in the United States in 1865, was when this was written and approved. However, this did not stop people who were former slaves from being discriminated against and treated differently in the United States.
Correct.
Our next question was, how did the white Southern people react to the amendment? So how did they feel about the amendment and what did they do about it?
Well, white Southerners weren't quite happy with this amendment because many of them relied on slaves for their plantations, which made them profit. So when they heard that the government was passing down this amendment, they were very upset. And later, it started the Civil War. So they didn't like it at all.
And it effectively kind of, I think what you're trying to get at as well is that it may have they may have thought that it was going to decrease the the local economy, I guess you could say, and their earnings from that. I guess that's what you're trying to say a little bit.
Yes.
Danielson, What's your take on it?
I think that, they weren't with it. They didn't like it because it was part of their economy. I can't say it. Economy, and they could, if the slaves were freed, they would have to pay for people to work.
Right, and it was like a way of life in the South at the time.
Yeah, it wasn't the part. It was more of the northern part, and now the South were being forced to do that, and them a lot of money, and they wanted to keep the money, make them lose some money.
Yeah.
In the North, they didn't really need slaves. It wasn't like you said, a part of their life or a part of a way to make money. In the South, that was like their primary way of making money.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's that. North was trying to do that because in the North they didn't have slaves. They were their economy run on paying people to do work,
like indentured servants.
No.
For the North, no, it was mostly like industry. Factories, industry. It was like factories and stuff like that. And in the South, it was mostly plantations. So you can see where slaves didn't really fit in the North, but they did in the South.
And that's how they divided.
And how did slavery end in the United States? So was it just with this, or was it with something else? Because, in my opinion, slavery didn't totally end with this amendment, because,
Mm-hmm.
there are still people who do it and illegally, or they will sort of like I said, like on the down low, or they would not follow this amendment and not do that, because it was also very difficult to get communication and get things to the other parts of the nation at this time, because of their lack of transportation and their lack of like communication methods as well.
Oh, even after this amendment was ratified, many people still owned slaves. It wasn't like it just ended in the year of 1865.
It wasn't like an
But
overnight thing, right?
yeah, no, it took many years in order for slavery to kind of leave the stage, but it's still done illegally. It just isn't talked about quite as much.
Like in other countries, there's still slavery, but we just don't talk about it, or not all people. Slavery still hasn't ended, still, but not as strong as it used to be.
Yeah, it's not as apparent and it's not as in your face as it used to be, because
Mm-hmm.
of the Atlantic slave trade and the triangular trade and all of that mess that happened.
Yeah, there's a lot of trafficking, right?
Yeah,
A lot
human
of people
trafficking.
come, and a lot of people are sold. Like mostly women and children nowadays are sold to like people to do whatever they want, right?
For
Once
sure, for sure.
again, yeah, they're once again property
Right.
against their will.
And how did it exactly end in the US? Coming back to the point, I think it sort of
Uh,
ended with, the whole. I think it
well,
happened after like desegregation,
it's,
really,
yeah.
because people kind of didn't totally feel at home. They didn't feel like they weren't discriminated against or said, or, quote unquote property, because,
hmm
with the segregation laws, people weren't treated as people, and that was a major issue, for sure.
After the Civil War, they were made a lot of new amendments. For example, the I believe it's the 14th, in order to take it another step, not to give them rights and stuff. So
More rights than they
really,
had, at least. Yeah.
correct. The 13th Amendment, all it really did is give, like, it was a law passed that they were free, but it didn't give them any rights like voting or maybe owning property. That came later in the years, and
And for a
so
lot of these, the voting rights especially was way later, like 20, 30
mhm
years later, not even just 5 or something. It's a lot later,
mhm
especially for women, especially for
correct.
women.
Mhm.
So, slavery then and racism today, what are some sort of similarities between those and such? Danielson, what's your view on that?
Um, because of slavery, we have racism. Because uh, when slavery started, it made people, it made white people uh, like they were property, basically human. They weren't a person. There weren't
They were
people.
dehumanized, I think is the word you're looking
Yeah,
for.
yeah, they were dehumanized. Which now nowadays we look down on. A lot of people look down on other people because of their color, and I think it stemmed from slavery, and that's why we have a lot of racism now.
For sure, I believe that a lot of this racism now, today, does stem originally from slavery, and it sort of has its roots there, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be fixed or something like that. I just think that a lot of reasons why we have racism is because of slavery and how people were treated, and people thought that that was okay back in the time period because they really didn't have anything else to go off of.
Mhm. No, it's always in history. It has always been blacks versus whites. And many white people in the past have tried to justify their actions through the means of maybe religion, that black people were not human, they were property, they were made or created black so that white could use them as slaves. And those ideals kind of stuck with people for a very long time. Maybe we don't necessarily connect it to religion anymore, but the ideas that black people aren't, like you said, they dehumanize them. They aren't this like equal to whites.
I agree with that. I agree with that 100% because, they have that whole concept of, white supremacy or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. You know, people like to use that term and throw it around, but I think that that was definitely sort of more prominent during this time period.
And also like the Jim Crow laws. That's what took part in it too, because it
Mm-hmm.
them. And then like the fountains, they didn't have the same fountains, but they had fountains.
Segregation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
They
water
have.
fountains, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
colored fountains and white people's the fountains for white people. It
It's
was
always been separated. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
There's
If
there's this side for blacks, this side for whites. Mm-hmm.
and usually the white people's part was better than the blacks and colored. The color.
So, in your opinion, could slavery have been ended right after the Revolutionary War? And why or why not?
No,
I don't think so
I
either,
don't.
but explain why you
Yeah,
don't think so.
I
Um,
don't think so because when the Revolutionary War finished, we weren't doing well. America wasn't doing too well economically, and plantations and well, the South made a lot of that money. So, and they needed the slaves in order to make the money. And at the time, it wasn't the best choice economically.
Right. I mean, I definitely think that it could have been done if need be, but I definitely don't
Mm-hmm.
think that it could have been done because of the viewpoints that people had on it and how
Mm-hmm.
much skin they had in the game, like with how many slaves they owned and stuff like that. I think that it could have been done if everybody was willing to try at least and get that done and out of the way.
Adding back to what I said before, a lot of plantation owners, like I was saying before, they didn't want to lose money, if that makes sense. So they at that point they wouldn't abolish slavery. Like I don't think any plantation owner would do that. But just to add on to that.
I think it could have been done if from the beginning we decided that after the war we would have like everyone would have been free, that a lot of people wouldn't have been hypocrites basically.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh no, I believe it should have done.
if
It should have been done in the beginning, but people's ideas back then aren't the same as now.
yeah, but it could have been done. That's what I'm saying. Just that people just didn't. People weren't.
With
I think
with
in
100%, if 100% of the people agreed that
Mhm.
they would do that, but obviously
Yeah,
100% of the
should've-
people aren't going to agree on that because it's a very controversial topic,
Yeah.
and a lot of people had slaves and they thought that they would lose all their money and all of their property, which, I mean, they might have because they had other people working their land for them and they weren't doing it themselves, which in turn
I
would
agree that-
mean that they would not be able to do something like that.
I agree that it should have been done. I just don't think that people back then would have done it.
No, I don't think it's a realistic thing that could have happened. I
correct.
just think that it should have happened.
Correct.
Okay, and like, what are the causes of slavery, where they had it then, and, even the causes of it now in the modern world elsewhere? What would be some things that would cause such a terrible thing to happen?
Well, the effects of slavery, it goes back to racism, really, and how we view one specific race lower or less than another, in my opinion. That's really the bad effects of slavery, and how we treated people in history, how we, treat them as property, how, they were enslaved for all their life and never knowing of freedom, you know?
Yeah.
I think that the root was that a lot of people were that they had egos that because they were enlightened, they were more advanced than other people, that they were better than them. So then they were like, "We bring you a new culture. We bring something that can save you. You're savages and we're not. So that means we're better. God is with us, not with." And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think it is. That most of it just stems from ego, from people that think that they're better than someone,
Yeah.
or that God gave them power,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how. And then because of the trade, that's what slavery caused, and how the
Mm-hmm.
war Africans have had, that they would sell the people that they had or that they just didn't want.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of white people back then thought that, just because they had lighter skin tone, they were better. And like the Nelson was saying, it had a lot to do, well, not a lot to do, but they kind of justify their actions with religion, saying that since they were more darker, they were created um, to be enslaved, to do the labor that the white people didn't want to do.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I definitely agree with that. Causes I definitely think is like inequality and definitely some racism as well. Um, for sure, for sure. And today's world, it still boils down to like inequality and people not being treated the same way. In
Mm-hmm.
the U.S., it's quite civil, but still, some extreme racism is present, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
as bad as, back then in
50 years.
1800s when it was
Mm-hmm.
when something like that would cause slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
also think that partially it's also, the lack of civilization and, being a third world country might give you more of a valid option as to having slavery, but it's not a good thing to have, and it's not something that you would want for anybody.
yeah,
Um, no, and I believe slavery has gone down a lot due to news or like word spreading around more. Because
And more
when,
civilized, or third
mm-hmm,
world countries
yeah,
coming up and becoming more civilized and having an actual government and such like that.
but what I was saying is, like, for example, social media. It has a lot of, when somebody's being racist, people posting it online, and it gets the word out. Like, it makes people see the truth behind racism. Like, it's right there. You can't
It's
lie in a
evident.
video. It's right
It's
there.
evident, right?
Yeah, you just can't hide it. Back in maybe 100 years back, you couldn't really, prove it right unless you were there. You can't prove this person was being racist unless you saw it yourself.
and the idea of racism wasn't yet, there.
Mm-hmm.
They just thought it was normal, that it was part of life. They didn't think about races or anything about. They were just thinking about money and their own benefits.
Mm-hmm. Their
Money
own
changes
gains.
people. Money
Yeah.
changes people, definitely in any situation, and money can make or break a situation, especially in this case, a lot of people are money driven at this point in time, and that would cause people to act like this, I guess.
Yeah. It goes back to the three G's, right? Gold, God, and what's the third one?
Glory.
Glory.
Glory. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Jennifer and Danielson. That's all the questions that I have for you guys. And
thank you.
I definitely think that this was definitely very informative for all of us, actually. And I believe that that should do it. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Alrighty, guys. That was the end of that podcast. Thank you for watching, tuning in, and I'll see you around.